to. And by that afternoon, he was up to 40, which was enough to block Ratzinger becoming Pope. And the moment I read this, well, here is a novel. Here are three characters immediately, and their fortunes change hour by hour as the voting goes on. And for me, sick that I am, this is riveting.
In interviews at the International Festival of Authors, she's done a great job of making our book section a lot better. Robert Harris. Well, I don't think I have to tell this audience much about him, but I am going to say a few words. You all know Robert Harris as a best-selling novelist, but I actually started reading him a long time ago when he was an ink-stained journalist and columnist. After leaving Cambridge, he joined the BBC and worked on such high-profile programs as Panorama, Newsnight, and then at the age of 30, he was lured away to print to become a political editor at The Observer. He later was a columnist for the Sunday Times and the Daily Telegraph. And in 2002, he won a British Press Awards for Columnist of the Year. Now, he insists that column writing, which I do for the Toronto Star right now, is the hardest job he ever did. And let me tell you, he's right. It's got deadlines, lots of stress, and apparently he had to psych himself up like a boxer every time he wrote a column. But on the days when he wasn't struggling to write a column, he began to write a novel that asked a question: what if the Nazis had won the war? The book, Fatherland, for which he sold the hardback rights for £500,000 and the paperback rights for more than £1 million. And that was it for print journalism. I should have learned from him. Since then, well, he's gone for success for 8 other bestsellers: Enigma, Pompeii, Imperium, The Ghostwriter, Archangel, Lustrum, The Fear Index, An Officer and a Spy, and now Conclave, which looks at one of the most secret ballots in the world, the election of a pope. Tonight, Robert Harris will tell you what the Cardinals were up to. Please welcome Robert Harris and Deborah Dundas.
Thank you all so much for coming out. It's wonderful to see all these friendly faces in the audience. Now, you've taken a look at ancient Rome, at being a ghostwriter, at the media, at the global financial markets, all of them very complex worlds. Someone said that what you do with your books is clarify these worlds. Is that what you set out to do?
Well, that's a good question. I set out as a journalist, really, probably, with the curiosity in my heart and a desire to find out how something works. And I've taken that curiosity and a kind of reporter's notebook with me into all the books that I've done, I think, even the ones set in ancient Rome, and certainly to the Vatican, almost literally, in fact, a reporter's notebook. I'm fascinated by the mechanisms of power and authority and how they work. And I was for many years a journalist, but until such time as I discovered that the tool of imaginative writing enabled me to get more to what I wanted to say than straight reportage, and that's why I became a novelist.
Well, there are so many different worlds that you've chosen. This time you've chosen the Vatican, and even more specifically, you've chosen a papal election. Tell me why you chose this particular topic at this particular time.
Well, I suppose right the way back, there's a novel that some of you may know by a now almost completely forgotten novelist called C.P. Snow, called The Masters, a novel published in 1951 about the election of a master in a Cambridge college in the 1930s, which is actually a really brilliant political novel. Although there are only a very few characters, it's politics up close and personal, the struggle between these people in a college to get the top job, and the secrets that come out from their past and their rivalries and the jealousies. So I've always liked that book a lot. And then in 2005 and 2013, when I was writing my Roman trilogy, there were papal conclaves. And I now know what happens, and that the Pope is elected in the Sistine Chapel. He's robed. He then walks along a long gallery towards the balcony overlooking St. Peter's Square, where there's hundreds of thousands of people are waiting to see him. And the 120 or so cardinals who've elected him follow behind. And as he goes onto the balcony, so they cluster at the windows to peer around and look at the new Holy Father. And these images caught on television in 2005 and 2013 of these elderly men, virtually none below the age of 60, their faces worldly, innocent, conniving, cynical, amused, horrified, tired, looking. When I saw them, I thought, that is the Roman Senate from Cicero's day. And this election has not simply been prayer in the Sistine Chapel. There's been much more to it than this. And that was when it lodged in my mind. And when I finished the Cicero books, when I finally came out from underneath Marcus Tullius Cicero, I vowed to myself I would see whether I could write a novel about it. And on the first morning of research, I came across a secret diary a cardinal kept against all the rules in 2005 about the process that had gone on, that was printed in a Italian theological magazine, and it described the back room, some of the backroom intrigue, and at that moment I knew there was a novel. So that was how I came to it, by curiosity and by this, endless fascination I've had for politics.
Now, digging out the details, that is such a hallmark, I think, of your work. You make us feel as if we're there. How much cooperation did you get in digging out the details so that you could give them to us of what actually goes on behind those Vatican walls?
Well, a surprising amount, really. I mean, the Vatican, first of all, the rules under which a pope is elected are freely available to anyone who wishes to consult them. They're in an apostolic constitution of great detail, almost hourly detail of what must follow the death of a pope. Everything is laid out. And so that gave me the framework and the timetable of the book. There is a first ballot. It begins 3 weeks after the Pope died. There's a first ballot on the first afternoon, and then they stop, and then the next morning, there's 2 more ballots, and then that afternoon, there's 2 more ballots, and the next day, and so on. And so it goes on until they reach a 2/3 majority, and there's a maximum number of electors of 120. So for me as a novelist, that gives me my skeleton. I love elections. I think the American election. I think the American election that's going on now is the greatest narrative drama that's occurred in the last, perhaps ever, actually. How will it turn out? I mean, it's fascinating. Elections, I think, are brilliant. They're almost like a law case, and because there's successive ballots until you get to a 2/3 majority, people rise and fall, So there was that. There was, of course, also various books about popes and so on. But I wrote to the Vatican and said what I was doing quite openly. I didn't know even who I was writing to in the Vatican. I just sent it to whom it may concern. Dear sirs, it began. I thought I was at least on safe ground with that. Dear sirs, I'm an English novelist. I've written so. I'd like to write a novel about a papal conclave. I shall, of course, treat it with great respect, which I think, in fact, I have done, or hope I have done. And to my surprise, I got a message back within a week saying, if you want to come, we will show you the sites. I basically asked to see the various places which are close to the public that the cardinals inhabit during a conclave, and they cooperated.
Now, tell us some of the details that you saw that surprised you.
Well, I think that there is, of course, the public side of the conclave, which we see, which is the cardinals filing into the Sistine Chapel, the doors, the cry of extra omnes, and then the doors are slammed shut and locked from the outside. And then, of course, we see the smoke emanating from the chimney, black smoke when there is no pope has been elected, white smoke when at long last there is one. The black smoke, all the smoke is ballot papers and all the paperwork being burnt in a stove. So there's that, and that is prayer, and that is rising one after another, swearing an oath and placing a ballot in an urn. But apart from that, the other location is the Casa Santa Marta, which is a modern hostel or hotel deliberately built by John Paul II in 1996 to house a conclave. It's got about 128 bedrooms, and when the conclave begins, the cardinals arrive. They surrender any mobile phones or laptops that they've been foolish enough to bring with them. Their luggage is scanned. They're taken up to their rooms. Don't try and open the shutters because they've all been welded shut. There's no natural light. There's only, electric light. Mm-hmm. And there they stay, completely sequestered from the world until they've elected a pope. And from there, they're taken in minibuses back and forth to the Sistine Chapel. And what happens is that the ritual and the prayer and the spiritual part is in the Sistine, but the raw, as it were, profane politics is in the Casa Santa Marta, where there's a communal dining room, where the candidates are, the leading candidates, and where their supporters, I think, gently try to persuade one another, and in the bedrooms and in the corridors, that is where the kind of, almost like an American political convention, that's where I think, in a very gentle way, the process happens.
Now, there's the feel of a murder mystery to this particular book. And if you think of Agatha Christie, you think of any sort of murder mystery, it's a very closed sort of system. And that closed system, did that lend itself to a murder mystery to you? Is that how that came about?
Yes, I think that one of the things that attracted me were the unities of time and place, the classical unities that the conclave observes. It takes place over 48, 72 hours within an enclosed world with a stock number of characters that doesn't change. And that poses challenges to a novelist, but it also is terrifically exciting, actually. I mean, to know your limits and then to try and find ways of making that exciting. That's a great pleasure. And one of the things I most enjoyed about the book, I mean, I have a perverse desire to take very unlikely subjects and try and convey my interest in them. So to write a thriller about 118 celibate old men locked in one location, at least they're supposed to be celibate, that is the pleasure of the story for me.
Well, the momentum keeps going, and it's the votes that keep it going, and those sorts of details.
Yes, as I say, I love a ballot. I mean, on that first morning that I tried to start researching the book, and I read the secret diary, the diary recounts the 2005 conclave. So we know more about that particular conclave than probably any other, thanks to this, whoever he is. It's obviously an authentic document. In 2005, the leading candidate, the favorite, was Cardinal Ratzinger, who was the dean of the College of Cardinals and therefore the man responsible for running the whole election. His challenger, he was a conservative, the challenger from the liberal wing of the church was the Archbishop, or the ex-Archbishop of Milan, Cardinal Martini, who had been around for many, many years and was the great white hope of the liberals. The first ballot took place. Let's assume you, for the sake of argument, you had to get to 80 to win. And on the first ballot, Cardinal Ratzinger got 47, and Cardinal Martini, crushingly, got only 10. Mm-hmm. And this Argentinian from nowhere, Bergoglio, got 9. And at the end of that ballot, everyone went back to the Casa Santa Marta, according to the diarist, and then the politicking began. And there were some wonderful small details. For instance, the Patriarch of Lisbon was addicted to smoking cigars and had to go into a courtyard to smoke and would be pursued by the kind of campaign managers for the rivals. And it was clear that Martini, although he was an eminent Catholic and had waited many years for this moment, his time had passed. And the next morning, Ratzinger got sort of 60 votes, Martini got almost none, and the Argentinian got 20, 22. And by that afternoon, he was up to 40, which was enough to block Ratzinger becoming Pope. And the moment I read this, well, here is a novel. Here are 3 characters immediately, and their fortunes change hour by hour as the voting goes on. And for me, sick that I am, this is riveting.
Well, it's quite funny because throughout the book, it's God's will, what God will. But that's not at all the way they're actually acting.
No, and the best thing for any dramatist or novelist is when people can never say what is truly on their minds. Mm-hmm. You know, dialogue which is just head on, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that, is boring. But dialogue that is, of course you would make the most wonderful Pope, and I would be terrible, and the last thing I wish to be is Pope. This immediately, into very rich territory, and it's just fantastic material in that way. But it does raise serious questions of ambition and fate. Look at my country. We've suddenly got this almost. Who's this woman who's suddenly prime minister? Why has this suddenly happened? Is it God's will, or is it low cunning, or is it somewhere between the two? It's the whole mechanism of politics, which is so fascinating to me, is almost in its purest form in a conclave, and that is not to belittle the spiritual element, which is obviously hugely important, because they are trying to find who God would want. But how do you decide who God would? How do you tell who God would want?
Because they're only human after all.
Yeah, and so the key to the book, really, for me, writing it, is Cardinal Lamelli, the central figure, who is the dean of the College of Cardinals, who is having a spiritual crisis, who's trying to pray and failing to make any connection with God. And this is not unknown even in the highest reaches of the church. Cardinal Basil Hume, the Archbishop of Westminster, had a similar spiritual crisis at the end of his life. And so the book, the central character is Lamelli, who's the dean, who has been a church bureaucrat, a diplomat, not a pastoral figure at all. And he is the dean of the College of Cardinals, and he's having this spiritual crisis, and he has tried to resign from the office before the book begins, and the Pope, the old Pope, has refused to let him go. And then the book opens with the Pope dying, and Lamelli finds himself in the midst of his own spiritual turmoil, having to preside over this election of the new representative of Christ on earth, and to preach the great homily on the morning that the conclave begins in St. Peter's. And so he is the way into the book, and he is a way of trying to dramatize that conflict between the sacred and the profane,
He's a very kind man, a very moral man, in the end, we see that he might have a little bit of ambition in there himself. But some of the other cardinals as well. I mean, there's a Canadian cardinal in there who is not a very nice man at all.
No. I wanted to write the first ever novel with a Canadian villain. So it's such a pleasure to be here to talk about it. I was told, I did have a cardinal who helped me, and one of the things the cardinal said to me was, everyone will tell you that they don't want to be pope, but I tell you, every cardinal goes into a conclave secretly with the name that they will choose if they are elected. And the other thing he said to me was that there will never be an American pope. He said that America is considered to have enough power in the world as it is, without being given the great spiritual power. But a Canadian
Is okay.
might be possible. And in the novel, there is it is said that Cardinal Tremblay, the name of the Canadian Pope, has all the advantages of seeming to be an American with none of the disadvantages of actually being one. And so he is a contender, and along with a conservative Italian and a liberal Italian, an African, because the great growth area for the Catholic Church is Africa, and might there be a black pope, and then a mysterious cardinal who arrives in just as the conclave is beginning.
And that mysterious cardinal is from Baghdad. And I think you have a few things to say about a cardinal from Baghdad.
Well, yes. I mean, one of the things that's a serious backdrop to the novel is the appalling things that have happened to the Christian community in the Middle East, which are surprisingly undercovered, it seems to me, in the Western media. There was a population, a Christian population in Iraq of 1.5 million before the two great Christians, George Bush and Tony Blair, decided to intervene. And now there are only 150,000, and they live in a life of some pressure, with a lot of threats and quite a miserable existence. And so I wanted to introduce that element into the novel, and also to try to dramatize what seems to me, as an outsider, a secular figure, as person, writer, the interesting, constant division in the church between the teachings of Christ, which are extraordinarily radical, to do with poverty and the dispossessed, and a dislike of the powerful, with the great structure of the Catholic Church, which seems in many ways so antithetical to that, and the figure of someone who'd been working in Baghdad and who had stayed there, and who is a cardinal, but has been made in secret a cardinal, seemed to me a good way of bringing in those themes.
There's a purity to this cardinal's motive that we don't see in the other cardinals.
Well, I mean, hanging over the novel is the figure of the dead Pope, and who owes quite a lot, without being, I hope, disrespectful to the present Pope and sort of dramatizing him as dead. Nevertheless, the Pope that has passed away is similar to him. And it does seem to me that Pope Francis does somehow reconcile within himself this contradiction, that he is a Jesuit and believes, obviously, clearly, sincerely, in poverty and being with the sick and the ill and the weak, and a dislike of the powerful and the rich, and has chosen to live a life of poverty insofar as it's possible within the Vatican. So he dramatizes in himself that conflict and the idea that he has died, and then the conclave proceeds, and he has planted various, as it were, time bombs that go off during the course of the novel. That's really the structure of the book. I mean, in the course of preparing to write the book, and as I say, I am not a Catholic, I did read the Gospels, and I read them quickly, almost as one might turn the pages of a novel. And it was I must say, it was a quite overpowering experience.
Now, had you had familiarity with the Gospels before? Was this a first-off thing?
No, only insofar as one had generally, in any, growing up in our culture, one would know of it, and having been at school, and done Bible studies, but nothing in my adult life, really. And I was very, very powerfully struck by the radicalism of the message, which rises off the pages. It's almost like, to read them quickly is almost like reading some modern novel where the same incidents are recounted from different points of view again and again and again, and you can see the sort of sources coming through, and they've been written, the first three at least, within 30 years or so of the actual events that have been recalled. And it has a very powerful effect, because there are the words, but they're coming to you through eyewitnesses, as it were. And it describes a real, almost thriller-like journey over 2 or 3 years from obscurity heading towards a final showdown, which is sort of known is going to be a disaster. And I found it very powerful, and I realized that it would be impossible to write the book without a strong sense of that in it.
Do you need a spiritual sense as well? Do you believe in God?
Well, now that's a very interesting question. I believe in people who believe in God, I think would be my English answer to that. I am not an atheist, insofar as I don't have the arrogance to be an atheist. But I cannot claim that I believe that I'm an Orthodox Christian in that sense, but I was overwhelmed by the power of the message, and I think that people who are striving for faith, striving to find something more, there's something more interesting to me in that than the kind of adolescent folding of the arms and the sneer and the biological response. Okay, we all go through that phase. It's something more interesting about the quest. And the book is in the character, because Lamelli is having this spiritual crisis, he believes in doubt, because faith relies upon there being an element of uncertainty. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called faith. And he expresses something which I profoundly believe. Almost the only philosophy I've arrived at is a detestation of certainty. In politics, religion, or almost anything else, I beware of the person who's certain that they have the answer. And that is what Lamelli believes, and in a way that's what I believe also.
Now, you've been called the writer of intelligent thrillers.
It's better than being called the writer of stupid things.
I was going to ask, how does one take that, to have the thriller needing to be qualified by the intelligent?
Yes, I know what you mean, because thriller does suggest sort of a kind of guy on water skis and a babe in a bikini and a gun going off and
a theme song in the background.
Yes. Thriller, if you write about the exterior world, say like Conrad did, who you could almost say The Secret Agent or in Nostromo or those books, is a kind of thriller writer. If you're writing about politics, terrorism, power, you almost invariably end up with all the features of those worlds, which are conspiracies, ambition, threat, assassination, betrayal, all the tropes of the thriller are naturally there. I mean, I don't want to go on about the American election, but look at it. It's unfolding like a thriller. I mean, this is not to be described in kind of literary novel terms, is it? It's a great, gaudy, astonishing phenomenon involving Russians and God knows what. And that, so if you write about politics, you write a thriller, almost, by default.
Well, since you brought it up, political hubris.
Yes.
You deal with that a lot in so many of your books. How does that apply to what's going on right now? Both in, I mean, we can take the American election, we can take what's going on in the UK.
Yes. Well, first of all, I don't take the House of Cards kind of view of politicians. I'm not starry-eyed about politicians in any shape or form. But politicians are essentially human beings, and most of them go in...
Essentially human beings.
Yes, I know. Because there is something a bit weird about them, let's face it. But on the whole, most of them are going with idealistic motives and to do good in their community or whatever, and with a desire to serve. But power is like plutonium or some radioactive substance. If you seek to handle it, sooner or later you will be. If you handle it for too long, you will be irradiated by it. It needs to be carved up, handled, divided. It needs very, very carefully shepherding by a constitution, by a set of rules. And so my study, as it were, is of those that seek this and are almost inevitably corrupted and eventually destroyed by it. And very few political careers end happily, because the very nature of the person who is prepared to make the personal sacrifices and to go through the extraordinary expenditure of energy that is required to pursue this will not have the capacity to judge themselves in the round, and they will be too single-minded to ever want to give it up once they've got it. And the notion of a politician that sort of will limit themselves to a particular time and then will pass it on, they're almost never going to get the job in the first place if they can see themselves in that way.
But you had mentioned that David Cameron actually promised that at one point.
And look what happened to him. I mean, here's a perfect example of a man who actually won an election and then in his hubris and his arrogance and his absurdity not only destroyed himself, but in my view, it may be too early to tell, I hope I'm wrong, but has done great damage to not only his own country, but potentially to Europe itself. So, Cameron is like a figure from a thriller. Shakespeare wrote great thrillers. Shakespeare wrote great historical novels. Shakespeare chose to approach the politics of his own time through the back door, through writing about ancient Rome, rather than, of course, it would have been deadly dangerous and impossible for him to write a thinly disguised portrait of Elizabeth's court. So he chose to write it through ancient Rome or history plays. But politics is the stuff of drama, right back to the ancient Greeks. It is the greatest kind of material for a dramatist or a novelist, I think.
Now, in ancient Rome in particular, I mean, it's a story that's been told and told again. Why is there still so much to mine from that?
I think because ancient Rome is the template for our modern politics. Almost all of it flows from that time, and it has a particular resonance for us now, I think, because we're living through this we're living through a time when it feels that very solid institutions, I mean, certainly in Europe and in the United States, seem to be under threat. Things that we taken for granted, democratic structures, no longer seem to have quite the strength that they previously did. And that is the lesson from the end of the Roman Republic, which was, after all, centuries old, but somehow failed and collapsed, and that system of government disappeared for 1,700 years or more. Why? That's why there's such resonance from that period, I think.
Now, all of these stories are about leaders. I mean, that's the stories we're talking about, the stories
Yeah.
you deal with are about power and about leaders. Have we found a good way to choose a leader yet?
Well, I think, we could learn a lot from the Catholic Church, actually. I think that the idea that a leader has to have a 2/3 majority, for instance, is quite a sound one. Almost always, the person who is the favourite in a papal election loses. And certainly in British politics, for instance, the favourite to be leader of the Conservative Party almost invariably loses because all their opponents coalesce around someone else. They're too early and too easy a target. And I think that consensus that the cardinals have to gather around someone. Also that it's a college, an electoral college, that they know, they've seen the person close up, they know what's required of the job. I think that's quite interesting as well. And my own, obviously because of what's happened in Britain that I find troubling, I think that the worst form of democracy is the plebiscite or the referendum, unless at least there's a constitutional lock of, let's say, 60% to 40%. Because we have now in Britain 48%, 16 million people who are completely ignored. I mean, it's they're just dismissed as Ramonas and complainers and so on. And this is the tool of dictators, always, that then take this majority and use it to smash their opponents. And it's the antithesis of representative democracy, where power is diffused through individuals who have conscience, exercise conscience. And it's a profoundly worrying development, I think, that we've had.
Now, I'll get a little bit more into politics because clearly your background isn't simply as a novelist, but also as a political commentator, as a political journalist. What do you see happening with the failure in leadership or the divisive leadership that we've seen in the UK and in the US in this election? What kind of impact is that having on our democracy, on the way on the cynicism that people feel? They don't feel as if they're participating in a way that's positive.
Well, I think people do feel they're participating. I think that having had decades, really, that we've lived through quite easy times when we haven't really had to bother too much about politics. Suddenly politics, almost for the first time since the 1930s, is crowding in and impinging upon the thinking individual's life. And why is that happening? I mean, there's certainly an interlinked phenomenon between Brexit, Trump, the rise of right-wing parties in Europe, and it is to do, obviously, with globalization and to do with the technological developments which have run away from our democratic structures, and that the politicians have lost control of them. And it was fine until there was the financial crash, but ever since 2008, there's been a sense of things slipping out of control. And, there's been, in particular, at least in Europe, a collapse of left-wing parties that just don't have any answer anymore to globalization. They don't know what they're supposed to be saying. The British Labour Party is led by, a lot of, to put it crudely, sort of bourgeois do-gooders, presiding over a party of working-class, deeply disillusioned traditional voters. And, this is a time of great turmoil. And in the United States, the ordinary guy is being championed by a billionaire who pays no taxes. I mean, you say, who could make that up? I mean, and I say this not as a cliche, but seriously, if you tried to present this in a novel, a reader would say, no, how can that simply cannot be. But it is, you know. And so this is an extraordinary political time to do with cultural wars and resentment of elites and so on, that does have an uneasy echo in the Roman Republic, where demagogues whipped up the masses. And they were often, these demagogues, men like Clodius, who were themselves aristocrats, millionaires, who disdained, in fact, privately, the mob. And yet there was an alliance between them and the mob. And that's why Rome is fascinating, because really these things are quite, in some ways, they're quite simple. You know, we repeat very simple patterns as human beings. And that's what I think one feels at the moment. You know, we will see how it plays out, but it is the great thriller narrative of our time that we're all locked in, I think, these elections and this period.
Mm-hmm. But it's even in Conclave, I mean, which is supposed to be a closed place, the world popped in a couple of times. You couldn't quite keep it out. Why did, without giving too much away, there was a terrorist attack outside the Vatican during the conclave, and so some portion of glass fell.
I think we are giving away quite a lot. I'm seeing readers slipping away here. I'm seeing all these hundreds of copies I've signed will be lying there unbought.
But
pretend we didn't hear that.
But the outside world did
Yeah.
make its way, and why did you do that then?
Well, because I don't think it's possible for an institution like the Catholic Church to avoid living in the real world. And I mean, the great debate is really, do you fall victim to what the Ratzinger and his supporters would say is the sin of relativism, that you say that all these isms, the socialism, nationalism, whatever it is, whatever passing fad is going through the world, feminism or whatever, do you change your doctrine? Do you abandon your principles, and do you say we must now move to recognize these new forces, which they would see as total betrayal of the church? Or do you, as the liberals would say, does the church have to be a living organism that represents what is happening at the time and takes the principles of Christ and applies them in a modern context? And that is the constant war within the church, it seems to me. And I wanted to inject into the novel some rude shock of the world outside. And, you know, we will have to wait and see how things develop over the years to come. But is the conflict with radical Islam going to go away? No, I don't think so, because in fact in the list of things one could apply to globalization and the technological revolution, obviously the explosion and the threat of the terrorism coming from religion has to do with all these devices of communication that have made it possible for terrorist acts to suddenly have so much strength. You know, you couldn't have had terrorism really before you had mass communication, because it wouldn't have had the effect. We wouldn't have all be bothered about what had happened in Paris or Brussels, because we wouldn't have known about it. But now we know instantly, and so it hits us. And so that's the world in which the church has to operate now.
We have now time to take some questions from the audience, probably 2 or 3 questions, no more than that. I think there's a microphone in the center aisle there. So if any of you have been thinking that you want to ask Robert Harris something, please take the microphone. And please keep the question a question, not comments.
We're unlike the Pope. I don't take that kind of comment. I know how I would deal with the question. And I must apologise for having to dash off, but I have to get the 11 o'clock flight to London, which is the only reason why I've had to sign books, pre-sign books, rather than hang around to do them now.
It has been said that the current period is evocative of the 1930s in Europe. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, sorry, I didn't see where the question came from. Can I?
This lady here.
Oh, yes, I do think there are similarities. In particular, I suppose in the 1930s there was a feeling that the system was failing the people, and there was great inequality and economic breakdown, and allied with a kind of explosion of technology, of radio and newsreel and aeroplanes, and so I do feel there are certain similarities. And in fact, the next novel, the novel I want to write is set in the 1930s, I think that some of the things that one sees that are happening are alarming. And I have more sympathy now and understanding for how people would have felt looking at the politics in the 1930s, the irrationality. I mean, we all know what would happen if Trump was to win an election. He may not win an election, but he's getting roughly the same proportion of votes that Hitler got in 1932 when he ran against Hindenburg and in the elections of that time. I'm not saying that Trump is a murderous in the way that Hitler was, but there's the same sense of sort of, he's endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan, and he's, it just feels irrational. I mean, why would that happen? We have to, if we believe in democracy, believe that the people are, in the end, come to the right decision and are rational in what they decide to choose to do. And once you start, I mean, I voted in 9 general elections in my country. Only 3 times have I voted for the party that won. Okay. But when I look back, I can see the wisdom of my fellow countrymen and women in voting the way that they did. It wasn't the way I voted, but I can see that they were probably right. And maybe the people that voted the other way see that the 3 times when it was right that they lost. You no longer feel that. And that's you feel it's like being in an earthquake, the ground sort of shifts slightly under you, and you no longer quite feel in the common sense of the people, which you need if you're having a democracy.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Maria, and I had a question regarding the Guardian book review that claimed Conclave is unputdownable. And in the end, which is true, I just finished it, and they indicated, could you think of maybe the Olympics or FIFA as a current topic to take apart and go inside next time? And I thought, we'll put in a vote for that, even though you said you might be going back to the 30s. But,
yes.
You can move it forward a little bit.
My only problem is my total allergy to all sport. Kind of rules me out from that. No, I kind of agree with you. I did actually toy with the idea of a dystopian novel in which there was an Olympic Games in which everyone was encouraged to take however many drugs they wanted. And that actually the Olympics would become like Formula One. And it would be Big Pharma running their various... and what a fascinating spectacle it would be. How people would look, how they would run, how at the vast distances things would be thrown. I mean, why not? What a great spectacle. Maybe that's not a bad... Maybe it's certainly quite not a bad movie. I think that I'm more interested in politics than I am in that. But it's an interesting idea. And it was very odd, that Guardian review, because it sort of implied that maybe unputdownable was a terrible thing to say. It was like he was diagnosing some terrible illness he'd suddenly come down with and couldn't quite explain what had overcome him. But it was a kind review.
Next question, please.
Yes, Lewis Ford. Actually, I drove from Niagara-on-the-Lake today just to hear you this evening, and I'm glad I did.
Oh, well, thank you. It's very kind of you.
Another compliment before my question. I once toured Pompeii with a professor from the University of Naples. That was his specialty. And he praised your book on Pompeii for its historic accuracy.
Oh, what a great man.
My question is, because you're fascinated with the pursuit of power, and going back to Roman times, and I'm not a historian, by the way, such gentlemen, if you can call them, gentlemen of Sulla and Marius, and of course Claudius, they would make such fascinating characters in a book. And could I beg and implore you to write a book about them?
Well, I'm sort of togered out, at least for now. I'd like to write a book in which nobody's name ends in us, where they don't lie down to eat. But it is very rich. It is an extraordinary parallel world, really, to ours. And it does pose various questions. I mean, apart from music, for which obviously we have the technology to produce much better sounds, have we really improved in terms of oratory or philosophy or drama or even art? I mean, you know, the ancient world it really corrects, should correct hubris in us, in our modern world, that we are superior to them. I really don't think we are, even after 2,000 years particularly, except, you know, you may say that we aren't as cruel and so on, but then when you look at Hiroshima or you look at the terrible things that are happening in the Middle East, can we really truly say that we are less cruel? I don't know that we are. So I find it a very rich area to explore, but I think that maybe, at least for the time being, I've done exploring. The one character who did fascinate me, who pops up at the end of Dictator, who it seems to me has been overlooked by history, and I think you could write an alternative history around, is the character of Marcus Agrippa. And I was publicizing Conclave in Rome 2 weeks ago and looked at the Pantheon that Agrippa built that has that extraordinary macho inscription over, you know, Agrippa, son of so-and-so, in his third consulship, built it. And I wonder whether Agrippa wasn't the real ruler of Rome, and that the front man was Augustus. And I think that would be quite an interesting book to write.
So that would be another what-if question.
Well, I think that's probably, and it would be a way, again, of writing about power and that idea of someone, you know, whoever ruled Rome would need to be a descendant of Julius Caesar to have the army follow him and so on. But all the historical evidence almost seems to me to suggest that Agrippa was really running the army, running the navy, building everything. He built the aqueduct in Pompeii, for instance. I mean, Agrippa was like the man, and indeed was the official heir to Augustus. So, I mean, that interests me. Maybe I might do that in my old age, which is coming upon me rapidly.
Let's give Robert Harris a big round of applause.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Deborah Dundas, for coming out today.